Travel to a land of medieval castles, charming villages, awesome natural beauty, timeless countryside, and lively pubs. Make the best of your time in Ireland. There's more to see in this country than you could possibly do in a week, so we're going to hit some highlights. We'll see ancient civilizations on the Aran Islands and the Ring of Dingle, the castles of the Norman conquest at Trim and Limerick, the power of the church at Cashel and Jerpoint, the English aristocracy at Kilkenny, the terrible beauty of natural wonders at Moher and Dingle, and some of Ireland's award-winning towns. Driving can be intimidating, but it's the best way to get out and see the country. Now, if you're renting a car in Dublin, you're much better off to pick it up at the airport rather than in town. Use the Dublin Express bus if you need to get out there. You'll drive on the left side, and Irish roads are extremely narrow and twisting, so insurance is a big issue. You should definitely read up on that issue on the internet before you get in country. It's really not that bad if you check with the company in advance. Another thing that's similar to the UK are the plugs. You'll need the 3-prong type like this, not the 2-prong type used in the rest of Europe. Just 40 minutes from Dublin is the town of Trim, which sits along the Boyne River. This neat and charming town was voted Ireland's friendliest in 2018. Makes you wonder what happened in 2019, but it's still dominated by Trim Castle. We are here at fabulous Trim Castle outside of Dublin. Now, this castle was built in 1174 by the Normans when they came to establish control over Ireland. Now, you may have seen this castle before. It was featured in the movie Braveheart with Mel Gibson, and there it stood in for the Castle of York. In the 1100s, Ireland was a land of warring kingdoms. In 1176, a chief with the fabulous Irish name of Rory O'Connor drove out the rival king Dermot MacMurrough of Leinster. Dermot was not quite done, however. He went to England, which had been taken over by the Normans just a century earlier, and convinced them to help him get back his kingdom of Leinster, not to be confused with the fabulous rugby team of the same name. Dermot returned with an army of Normans who promptly took over and began over 7 centuries of British control of Ireland. The Normans built a wooden fort here at Trim, but old Rory wasn't done yet. He burnt that to the ground. It then fell to Hugh de Lacy, a guy with a very French Norman name, to build a state-of-the-art medieval castle on this spot. This is the largest Norman castle in Ireland. It is surrounded by walls on 3 sides and the river on the 4th side. These arrow slits made it very hard for enemies to shoot in. Attackers who made it into this gate would have hot oil poured on them from above. The inner keep has walls up to 10 feet thick. You can only enter the keep as part of the quite excellent tours given by the park guides. And although this building looks pretty rough today, it would have been covered in white plaster and it'd be nice and smooth. It would look something like this. This was the richest and most important Norman castle in its time. Now we're off to see the Rock of Cashel. This hill, which dominates the countryside of Tipperary, was the seat of the kings of Munster before Christianity. It's said that St. Patrick baptized King Angus here in 450. For 600 years, the clans fought over it until Murtagh O'Brien donated it to the church in 1101. Your admission includes an excellent guided tour. The small, lighter-colored chapel, built in 1134 by King Cormac MacCarthy, was the first on the rock. The larger cathedral was squeezed in around it. The interior of Cormac's chapel requires a separate admission. It's climate controlled because some of the original painting is still visible. The oldest structure at the rock is the round tower. 90 feet tall and built without mortar, it was used primarily as an observation point, as this area dominated the local countryside. Of the main cathedral, built in the 1200s, little of the interior decoration remains. It was not just the elements that erased it, however. In the 1640s, when the forces of Oliver Cromwell brutally suppressed the Irish uprisings, much of the population of Cashel took refuge in the cathedral, which the British proceeded to burn with all its occupants inside. They removed the roof so the building could not be used. The bishop lived in a fortified tower with walls up to 3 feet thick. The large chunk of wall that you see on the ground broke off from the tower above and fell to the ground. The holes are where wood beams were used to hold it together during construction, and the wood was eventually left to rot away. To get an idea of what this area once looked like, the Hall of the Vicar's Choral has been restored. The active cemetery has some fine examples of the Celtic cross. The circle, which represents the sun from Celtic religion, was meant to appeal to the local populace. In the distance are the ruins of Moher Abbey, not named for the virtue of its monks, but for the frost. And now we're off to Jerpoint Abbey. You don't have to worry about crowds at this quiet site. This abbey was established in the 1100s, far from any towns. This monastery was established by the Cistercian order, and they came from France. This was an order that was big about austerity, about getting away from the temptations of civilized life. And so that's why they came to Ireland, which was very sparsely populated, and they went out to the most remote areas they could find. Here, they were able to get 20,000 acres of land, and to get away from the temptations of any cities. The abbey was supported with a large amount of agricultural land. At the center was the cloister, which has been partially restored. This one is unusual for a Cistercian site for having carvings on the pillars. These would serve as reminders to the monks as they walked past them on their processions. This one depicts an abbot, and at his feet, barely visible, is an image of a pig. This represents one of the temptations the monks would have faced. This is a knight, likely one of the sponsors of the abbey. This manticore from mythology represents sin, seeking to tempt the monks. The walls were built with rocks from the nearby fields, but the abbots felt that the random patterns these made was distracting to the monks, so they had them covered up with white plaster. When Henry VIII converted to Protestantism, he closed down all the monasteries. Jerpoint was closed in 1541 by removing the roof so it could not be used. This impressive tower was meant mostly to show the importance of the abbey, not primarily for defense. This tomb contains depictions of the 12 apostles. Peter has the keys to heaven. St. Andrew is depicted with the X-shaped cross, which will become the symbol of Scotland. St. John is the only one without a beard, as he was considered to be the youngest of the apostles. This sign shows the monastery is still a place of contemplation. From there, we're going to head to the charming village of Kilkenny. And with Ireland's narrow, twisting country roads, we just hope we don't kill Kenny or anybody else on the way there. Kilkenny is a charming town that's easy to walk, challenging to drive, and to park. If you do have to park here, your best bet is the Market Cross parking garage. Just do a Google search for it. From there, you can walk to pretty much any place in town. These narrow slips provide passage between the streets. This one remembers Petronella, servant of a wealthy woman whose 4 husbands died mysteriously. And while the boss had the money to escape persecution, Petronella was made a scapegoat and burnt at the stake, as part of the witchcraft persecution going on during the Black Plague of the 1300s. The beginnings of Kilkenny are at St. Canice Cathedral, the second oldest in Ireland. The name Kilkenny actually means the Church of Canice. Although the church dates to the early 1200s, the round tower goes back to the 900s. It is one of only 3 in Ireland that you can climb to the top. Like most cathedrals in Ireland, this one was converted to Protestantism when Henry VIII switched his empire over. It remains an Anglican cathedral. This is the tomb of the Bishop of Ossory, who led the witchcraft trials that condemned Petronella, among others. Among the most interesting items is a diorama showing Kilkenny in the 1600s. You can see how the cathedral dominates this small walled city. The Red Book of Ossory is a 14th century manuscript containing, among other things, a copy of the Magna Carta. One of the oldest churches was St. Mary's. Today it is a museum. This small museum tells how Kilkenny was affected by the Great Plague in the 1300s. The most interesting display recreates the lives of 3 skeletons found recently, showing how difficult medieval life was. Across the street is the Roath House, dating to 1600. This belonged to one of the 10 great merchant families that basically ran Kilkenny. And it gives you an idea of what luxury looked like at the time. Though parts have been rebuilt using the old techniques, there are still some surviving beams. During the ill-fated 1641 Irish uprising, the Confederation of Ireland was briefly led from this spot. Kilkenny Castle was built by the Normans in 1260 to control this area. It originally had 4 walls, as you see here, but the 4th was destroyed by the forces of Oliver Cromwell in 1650 when he suppressed the Irish uprising. The Earls of Ormond, who came over with the Normans, controlled this castle from the 1100s until they sold it to the Irish government in 1967. This family of well-connected English nobility included one of the grandmothers of Anne Boleyn. The castle has been restored to its 19th century grandeur. By that time, the castle was meant to show off power and wealth, not for defense. A highlight is the Grand Picture Gallery, which celebrates the illustrious members of the family, and some noble animals. The antlers of the prehistoric Irish elk were meant as a status symbol. This all at a time when most Irish were struggling to survive. Today, the castle gardens are open to everyone. The river today is dominated by pubs instead of castles. And like any proud Irish city, Kilkenny has its own beer. Don't tell anyone it's actually made by Guinness. A great place for this is at Matt the Miller's, across the river from the castle. Here we have the traditional Irish fish and chips. I think they have something similar in some other country, but we won't mention it. Our next destination is the city of Limerick. And sorry, but this is not actually the origin of the fabulous poems of that name. Those originated in England, but the early ones used Limerick as something to rhyme with. Limerick sits at a strategic location on the headwaters of the Shannon River, which goes to the interior of Ireland. The Vikings built the first settlements here in the 800s, but it was the Normans who came at the end of the 12th century who fortified this place. King John, yes, he's the bad guy from the Robin Hood stories. He was the one who ordered a castle to be built here in 1210. However, he never visited and he never saw this castle, and it only bore his name after his death. King John's Castle is still the main attraction in Limerick and will be the first place you'll want to go. There's free parking across the street from the castle. With this castle guarding the trade routes, Limerick became one of the richest cities in medieval Ireland. Ireland has some of the best interactive history exhibits you'll find anywhere, and the Visitor Center at King John's is one of the best. You can watch Limerick evolve year by year from a Viking town. You can see how it was built and meet the builders. See what the town looked like in the Middle Ages and see some arts of the day. Spiral staircases in castles were designed so that a right-handed person going up the stairs would be hitting their sword on the central post, whereas someone coming down the stairs would have a free hand. The castle was the site of a major siege by the forces of Oliver Cromwell in 1650. They tried to undermine the castle walls. The museum even let you experience how big their tunnels were. St. Mary's Cathedral is actually older than the castle. Like others, it was switched to Protestantism by King Henry VIII. This spot is where the original Viking palace stood. This was the burial tomb of Mayor Edmund Sexton, not related to the great Johnny Sexton. Edmund was King Henry's man in Limerick and took full advantage of his authority to close down monasteries. His body was dug up in 1600 and hung upside down from the rafters of the church. Oddly enough, it took 3 years from anyone to notice, which says a lot about the times. Cromwell's forces used the inside of the church as a stable during the rebellion. Some other famous people have been buried here. Across the river, the Hunt Museum houses the collection of John and Gertrude Hunt, lifelong collectors and archaeologists. The museum is fairly small and includes a scattering of objects from around the world, artifacts from prehistoric and ancient Ireland, like this bronze shield. This mold shows how bronze tools were made. Most interesting collection is of Christian artifacts, including these belonging to a 15th century Limerick bishop. And a very rare painting of God the Father. It's an interesting stop if you happen to be in town. Now we're headed to the fishing town of Dingle. This town of about 1,000 people was once a major trading port, especially with Spain. It's been a fishing port since the mid-1800s. For most visitors, it's a stop on the way to the Ring of Dingle. It's definitely worth walking around, and you can get Ireland's best beer here. Today it gets pretty crowded with tourists, so your best bet for parking is down by the waterfront. The Ring of Dingle is a 30-mile cliffside drive with some of Ireland's most dramatic scenery. We're on the western edge, not just of Ireland, but of all of Europe here. In the center is the second highest mountain in Ireland, and it drops off to sea level very quickly. The roads are narrow, and you generally just pull over when you see something you want to stop and look at. When you imagine a perfect Irish view, it probably looks a lot like this. "50,000 sheep graze on some very steep hills." The coast is dotted with Iron Age forts. Built right on the coast, these were a warning to anyone who thought about landing around here. If the cliffs weren't warning enough. From Dingle, we're going to head north to the cliffs of Moher. We can save time by crossing the River Shannon using the ferry at Tarbert. The ferry leaves every half hour, and you can pay right on board. You just drive on and drive off, saving you a long detour around the Shannon. It's a pretty smooth ride compared to the next ferry we're going to be going on. From there, it's a scenic rural drive through County Clare. The Cliffs of Moher, not to be confused with the fabulous pub of the same name, are a UNESCO geological site and one of Ireland's most popular tourist destinations. Over 1 million tourists come here, but they all seem pretty dwarfed once you get to the actual cliffs, which stretch up to 700 feet high. If they look familiar, you've probably seen them in numerous movies. Here you can look down at the seagulls. The rugged landscape is what the Irish call a terrible beauty. In the constant heavy winds, not only the people had to be hardy, but the livestock as well, who were exposed out here all day. Guardrails keep you away from the edge, but you can experience the ledge in the state-of-the-art visitor center, complete with meditation room. No place is more Irish than the Aran Island. Of the three, Inishmore, with 800 residents, is by far the most popular. Now, the ferry schedules can be quite confusing and weather dependent, so it's highly advisable that you check these out before making plans. The most convenient departures for Inishmore is from the port of Rossaville, about a half-hour west of Galway. The seas are often extremely rough, and this ferry ride can make Space Mountain seem like you're standing still. It's definitely not a joke if you get seasick easily. On an average day, tourists outnumber residents of Inishmore by more than 2 to 1, so the ferries are met by a lot of tour vans ready to take you around the island. Biking is also an option, but on some days better than others. The port of Kilkenny has the only market and the only ATM on the island. On a rainy day like today, we opt for the tour bus. No need to book in advance, they'll find you. And for about 20 euros, you get a tour of the island and a lot of laughs.
If you're like me, you could be like looking up in the air. This is the... Okay. Are we good?
Inishmore is 2 miles wide and 8 miles long, but it has over 1,500 miles of rock walls. The rocks are not just there to keep the sheep in, but to clear the very rocky soil. There's not much natural soil, so the islanders have packed layers and layers of seaweed to create something to grow in. The roads are extremely narrow, but the local drivers are experts at handling them. Now, all tours will eventually bring you here to the foot of Dun Angus, Inishmore's highest hill and site of its greatest archaeological treasure. On the way, you can see the stones that were used to build this. While it's a fairly safe walk most of the way, the last few hundred yards are extremely rocky and slippery. The circular fort of Dun Angus probably dates back to 1 or 2000 BC. This is fabulous Dun Angus Fort up here on the summit of Inishmore. And this fort may date back over 5,000 years. And as you can see, it's quite windy because it is 300 foot straight down into the sea behind us. It was comprised of 3 concentric walls of stone. And it stood right on the edge of a 300-foot cliff. There are no guardrails here, and it is exceptionally windy. You have to put a fort so high up on a cliff. I mean, who's going to come all the way up here from the sea and try and attack you? Well, this had a lot to do with status. By putting a fort out here, anybody who was coming by could see it and see that the people who owned this island were very powerful, and hopefully they'd move on. From here, you can see across the entire width of the island. Of course, Aran sweaters are world famous, and there's plenty of places on the island to buy them. But the same sweaters that are sold here are also sold in the branches of the Aran sweater market in Dublin and other cities, so you don't have to carry bags around the island. From its Iron Age fortresses to its medieval churches to its modern charm, This is just a small sampling of what Ireland has to offer. For a tour of the capital Dublin, see our Dublin video. And we hope to see you on future travels.